So a large part of the story arc of Volume 2 of Guardians of the Galaxy is to show the pathologies of the center, let's say, the pathologies of identity. Now we know that this is what the movie's about because it's encapsulated in the catalyst of the story. The catalyst of the story is that the Guardians are hired to protect the source of energy, some batteries belonging to the sovereign race. They protect them from an interdimensional monster, a monster of chaos, a dragon basically in terms of symbolism. But when the Guardians encounter the queen of this sovereign race, something goes wrong. The sovereign race is presented as this pure race. They're golden, they're designed, and so they're intentional. And intentionality is important in understanding the center. But here this intentionality is shown to us in the extreme. So think eugenics. They're presented as without error, without accident. And the Queen criticizes the origins of the Guardians, speaks of Quinn's unorthodox and unknown genealogy, a hybrid, and so particularly reckless, she said. So notice the relationship between hybridity, the unknown, and chaos. So Rocket has himself stolen the batteries, and then he makes us understand that his theft is a kind of vengeance against the sovereign's pretension and pride. So the Queen fails to understand that it is precisely because this group of Guardians are unorthodox and peripheral, which makes them capable of defending the sovereign from that monster. But it's also what makes them capable of stealing the very thing that they were protecting. So the question of identity becomes the central question of the movie from the beginning, and it plays itself out as the story unfolds. So one side of the pathology of the center could be called the feminine side. Being unpolitically correct, but using traditional categories, we could call it the passive side of identity, in which is the desire to remain pure, right? To preserve absolute order, remain untouched in an almost hygienic manner. One of the traditional images of this is, of course, the image of virginity. So when the Queen is forced to go, and of course the Queen is a virgin, that's made explicit in the story. So when the Queen is forced to go to another planet, we see her walking on a carpet unrolled before her as she refuses to touch anything foreign. You know, and we can find this type of excess in our daily relationships. We have the trope that we find around us of the mother who's a clean freak. And we can understand this excess in terms of hygiene very well. So we know that the excess of hygiene in the modern world, the excessive use of disinfectants, for example, seems to be at least one of the causes of modern allergies. And so excess of purity actually causes in a reaction an excess of our defense system, which reacts disproportionately to things that are actually not harmful or even beneficial, which come from the outside. And there's a story in the Bible about this, a story about the excess of purity. Moses has married a foreign woman. In fact, she's a Cushite woman who has been described in tradition as being Ethiopian woman. So she's a woman with a dark complexion. And Moses' sister Miriam complains about this. And because of this criticism, she's punished, man, and her punishment is a skin disease. Her skin becomes white as snow, and so she is defiled by an excess of whiteness. Her excess of purity becomes a punishment, and she has to be kept out of the camp for 7 days. So the other enemy, the other important enemy in Guardians of the Galaxy is ego. Ego is in many ways the flip side of the pathology of the center, the active or masculine excess of the center, and that can be described as the excess of imperialism. So if the Supremes want to protect their energy, they want to protect their lineage, protect their identity at any cost from, let's say, leaking out, ego, which is of course a perfect name in what he represents in this movie, wants rather to spread his light throughout the entire galaxy, so that the galaxy becomes himself. He wants his identity to be all-containing, no difference at all. This is, of course, the Tower of Babel motif. He joins himself with all possible life forms, not with the purpose of creating new things, because he kills the offsprings in which he does not see himself, right? He will only tolerate that which is a manifestation of his own identity. So he doesn't understand. What he doesn't understand is that for there to be another version of him, that is, the very notion of other, means that there must be difference. And it is that basic blindness of pride which makes it impossible for him to even conceive that Quill would be attached to his humanity, would be attached to the manner in which he is different from his father. And so Ego could not foresee his own demise. Now, these two pathologies of the center are obviously in many ways opposites, but in the end they're just passive and active sides of the same pathology, which can come from the excess of the center, the excess of the right hand, let's say, the excess of order, the excess of identity. And both of these tendencies and their excesses are totalitarian in the very explicit sense. That is, they want to believe that something can exist on its own, can be completely self-sufficient, which is impossible, of course, except for the infinite or the divine itself. Now, the question is there something anti-Western? Is there something anti-order, or is there some social justice propaganda in this movie? And maybe a little. It seems to be, let's say, strongly tilted to one side. But the chaos of the margin is also showed. We see that in the mutiny of the Ravagers against Yondu. That's a good example of the chaos that happens in the margin. Also, we see it in the resentment and the bitterness of Nebula, who's also a half biological, half robot creature. But it's also lurking in the background of this movie, because we know, especially if we've seen the first movie, we know that behind all this, lurking behind all of this story, is basically the head of the forces of chaos, I would say, which is Thanos, which is a version of death. And so despite the strong left-leaning tendency, some balance is still found in the overall story.